Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our podcast. I am Kelly Birmingham, and this is our podcast. It's a 25-year look across the spectrum, chronicling my 28 years in the field of working with children and adults with autism and developmental disability. And as always, I am with my partner in crime, Mom, Jen, mom to Dylan and Ethan. Hi, Jen.
Hey, Kelly.
Hey, Dylan has a birthday coming up. How old is he going to be?
24.
Oh my gosh, I have
I
been with
know.
him for 20 of those years.
I know.
Like most of my career.
It's
Well, we
pretty
have
wild.
we have a cool podcast today. I think they're all cool. Our podcast is designed to talk about the things related to autism and ABA that no one talks about, the real stuff, the practical real life stuff. So our podcast today is called ABA and ADHD from a caregiver and BCBA's perspective. So before I introduce our guest, I just want to give our shout out to SitePro. SitePro sponsors us, and they offer a wide range of engaging and practical continuing education courses developed by BCBAs for BCBAs. And if you go to their website, sitepro.com, you can see all their courses and you can listen to our podcast while you're driving around and get free CEUs. I myself have about, I think, 4 or 5 courses on SitePro's website. And Jen, you and I are doing one live in November. So go check out SitePro. All right, our topic today. So we have a colleague, friend, mom, Jennifer. Jennifer is mom to her son, Nathan, and she is also a BCBA. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for you to do this because it's a really sensitive topic that we're talking about today. And I'm grateful for your willingness to talk with us and share your experiences. So let's just start off a little bit with as much as you feel comfortable sharing about your son and his diagnosis.
Okay. Well, my son is 13 years old, and I would say I had he's diagnosed with ADHD and a couple other things. He has like an eye condition. He had surgery when he was younger. Um, and anxiety. I would say at a very young age, I realized that he might have ADD. And by young age, he started walking at 10 months, and I think he ran just after that, just continuous. Like I remember making dinner, and he would just run back and forth throughout the house. And talking to his doctor, and them saying, "Well, he's too young, but like use DHA, omegas, right?" And like all
Yeah,
these different things. At the age of 3, we did get him formally diagnosed with ADHD.
that's young.
It was young,
Yeah.
yes. And they actually diagnosed him with oppositional defiance disorder, but it was really just with me and his dad that he was defiant.
Mm.
Everybody else he listened to very well.
A lot of doctors will not diagnose that until 7 years of age.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, I would say that I I didn't really see much of it though, right? If anything, it was more the attention. It wasn't really the hyperactivity that was a concern. At school, he would sit, he would, it seemed to be he was attending, but he did at a very young age, he had problems reading. And I thought it was ADHD. And even as like I look back and I get very upset with myself how frustrated I would get. I am a single mom,
Mm-hmm.
so I was like making dinner, and he was supposed to be doing homework, and he would be underneath the table.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, sit down, do your work. Turns out it was actually his eyes. When he was reading things backwards. He was skipping lines. If you asked him what 8 + 5 was, he would tell you 13, but write 31. And so we did this vision therapy for a couple years, and he got pretty caught up, right? He can read, and his eyes are doing well now. Um, yeah, and then
So before,
around,
hold on
oh,
one
sorry.
second. I want to throw some research out there.
Okay.
So why is this important for BCBAs listening, right? So for a couple reasons is one, research suggests that between 30 and 80% of children on the autism spectrum also have comorbid ADHD, which Jen will have you talk about a little bit because you had that experience with Dylan. But then also the treatment for ADHD in general, there's two things. If you look it up, it's all it says: medication, behavioral strategies. That's it.
Mhm.
Right?
Yep. In fact, I did a 5-month CEU in which it focused on behavioral strategies and medication.
Yeah,
And
that's it. And for someone like your son who can't take medication, you're left now with behavioral strategies.
right.
Right.
Yes.
So please go ahead, and if you want to continue your story.
So in around right before the pandemic hit, we were the doctor's like last appointment before everything closed forever. You know what it felt like forever. We started him on, I can't remember the name of the medication, but I think it was for ADHD, and he did not respond well at all. So within like a week we took him off. It was major tantrums, and so it was very off. And so yes, the pandemic hit, but it was major tantrums. When the pandemic also hit in that first couple months, you know, his whole life was turned upside down like everybody else. But his anxiety went out of the roof to the point I couldn't get him to leave the house.
Wow.
So he became suicidal. He refused to leave the house.
Wow.
It was like physically prompting him. It was pretty bad. It would be like setting his shoes outside, getting us outside, and then locking the door. And sometimes he would run around just to try to go for a drive, right? Because I felt like it was important to at least get out for a drive once or twice a week. Then
So you were using shaping strategies, right? And different reinforcement strategies.
Yes, I would. I mean, it was, you know, using first, then this is what we're going to do. You know, trying to use reinforcement. Nothing was working at that point. So it did then become like a physical, and it was off to go do fun things, right? It was like meeting friends at the park to go walk around. You know, you know, it was very limited what we could do, but it was off to go do fun things. Yeah, so during that time, I mean, it was structured. It was definitely trying to use a lot of structure during that time, but giving him free time. I would say I was really good at no more than an hour of screen time prior to the pandemic, and that all went out the window.
Yep.
You know, like any type of structure like that went out the window.
Yep.
And so it at that point, it was probably about a month and a half. And that was the first time that we wound up in the ER, with the thought of looking at like psychiatric hospital care.
Wow.
We end up not doing that because we could finally see a psychiatrist. So prior to that, all that was offered during the pandemic was checking in with me like every 4 to 5 weeks. So it was just a phone call to check in how things were going.
Oh, how stressful.
Yeah. And so maybe it was like a couple months that I was able to get that help. And at that point, they got him on Zoloft. They got him on Zoloft, and we got, I think we started off with telehealth meetings with a therapist for him that then moved to in person. And then we stopped with the therapy because he was doing well.
Good.
Yeah. And so that was up to like 2021, and he did really well. You know, there was modifications I also did at home, right? I stopped watching the news altogether when he was awake.
Interesting.
Didn't talk about what was going on at all. Really trying to limit access to those things. He played a lot of Fortnite. I played Fortnite too to bond with him. Yeah.
Gosh, limit access right now too. I can't even look at the world right now.
That kind of can lead into what happened earlier this year too. Where, so things were going well. I would say I did. I would say I made a mistake at one point. It was probably about a year after, you know, he was doing well. I took him off of Zoloft because I didn't know there were so many variables, right, that was occurring. We did happen to move from a house to an apartment. in January of 2020. I was in a relationship and that relationship ended, right? And then obviously the pandemic, which was huge, right? Like he loved going to school. He, he had friends and everything, obviously. And those were huge. So I took him off Zoloft, and within 2 weeks, I want to say, the anxiety again would just went out of the roof. He wanted to sleep with me every night. He didn't want, I work out in the morning. He didn't want me to leave to go in the morning. It was definitely I could see like he was needing the medication, and the Zoloft is meant to help with his anxiety.
So I want to ask you both on this question, and I'll take us back, but it's something that as a behavior analyst, I think about all the time. And maybe I'm alone in this thinking, Jennifer, so you can tell me if I am, but like Jen, like as much as a behavioral analyst, I think I can like, everything is related to behavior. I just don't think there's enough training and thought about things that are biologically driven. Right? Neurologically driven, like your son, like you're a BCBA. Jen, you're practically a BCBA, Jen Lucero. And like all the strategies in the world. And I know I've had clients where this has happened. Dylan, this happened. Like we could not figure out some of his behaviors. And he was having all these like stomach issues and ulcer issues. So I just don't think it's talked about enough. Am I crazy?
I think it's not. And I think on the other hand, there's like this push, like, oh, take medication, it will cure it. And I didn't want to necessarily go that route.
Good point.
But I did like come to the terms, and I've come to the terms over the years too. I've been in ABA for 16 years. I've come to recognize it, like in some participants, like they definitely need medication, but it was really, I guess, hitting home to realize like my son needs this. There's something chemically, his body's not producing the right chemical balance for him to be able to handle some things. So
So go ahead, Jennifer. Were you going to say something?
No, it was just, that's what I was gonna say. It was, I think it's as a parent too, of accepting that it's hard sometimes. I think, and being a BCBA, thinking like, oh, I can just modify the environment. I can just do this, and realizing that there's something more there. So
Jennifer, when you were talking about this and all of that was happening, and with the pandemic, you said, he liked going to school and all his friends was he distance learning during that time that really became rough as well, or?
He was doing distance learning. Yeah. And I guess to throw in another variable in this was that we had moved from our area and moved down south. And so that school year I had actually moved him. So the first year I kept him in his old school and would just commute and take him. And then I had moved him the year of 2019, 2020. Right. And so I think he didn't have those same bonds too with the kids, but he would log on. Sometimes it was a fight to get him on, but once he got on, he was good. I think like a lot of individuals, I could barely get him dressed though, right? I think he spent like 2 months in pajamas. Like he just would not change into clothes. He saw no reason to do it. So
my kid will wear pajamas, pandemic or not. As soon as he gets in the house, it's like
I was wearing pajamas
during the pandemic. I, put on my work top, but half the time I was in jammy pants,
Same. So how is he now? How did it go?
That went well, and we did well for a couple years, and then he started junior high in 6th grade, and that was officially where they kind of went back to school, and it was more real, right? So this was 2 years ago, and so it was more like back to normal. They were no longer giving the option like, oh, you can still, join virtually. It was all the kids were back, and he went to junior high. And so I think that makes a big change. So even though I pushed for him to be back into school at the time, so I did get him back into his old school. And so I would drive like midday for him to go to school for 2 hours and then go back home. Right. Like it was a lot of commuting, but I felt like it was needed for his his mental health, right? Like he needed that. And then in 6th grade, it's a junior high. And so it was a lot more stressors of obviously going from class to class and having your homework turned in.
Yep.
7th grade is where things became really challenging for him. And at the end of 6th grade, he did have a falling out with someone who was a really good friend of his. And then he kind of he's taken on this mentality of not wanting to be close to kids his age, I guess, because he doesn't want to get hurt. And so and that continues to be a problem to this day. He has his friends that he plays with online, and I'm told he has friends at school, and he tells me he does, and they tell me no, he does. He eats lunch with everybody, but he doesn't really want to hang out with anybody on the weekends or during the summer. So that occurred. And then 7th grade, during that time, I also took on a more demanding job. We'll just say longer days. In the ABA, BCBA world, we do work like longer days.
Long
And it was
days.
sometimes like 10, 12-hour shifts, right?
Yeah.
That I was gone.
Yeah.
So there was a lot more expectations for him to be independent. He also started water polo that was like 5 days a week. And so that,
Which in theory, exercise is highly recommended for particularly boys with ADHD.
and I would completely agree. I think it's good. I think the problem was I wasn't home all the time to get him there, right? And so then it was relying on him to look at the time and to get out the door and to get there on time on his bike. And then I would arrange to pick him up. It was things, it was a lot of increase of independence on his part and time management.
Yeah.
And so in 7th grade, he started really falling behind. He wasn't doing his work. At one point, I think in each class, he had anywhere from 5 to 10 missing assignments. I took off an afternoon just to go from class to class to try to figure out what could we get done. I started helping him going through his backpack, and that was challenging, right? It's challenging to go through it. There's like wet papers and crumbs flying out, and like me keeping my cool, like, and when I'm ready to, like, I'm like, what in the world is going on here? But trying to like also realize it's going to increase his anxiety.
That's the point. Research on ADHD, treatment is medicine and behavioral therapy, but the biggest factors are homework, particularly the time management and executive functioning, organizing of it, and keeping up with social pressures. Those are like the two biggies that come up every time.
Yeah. And so during like that fall, winter time, I did, behaviorally, he was doing well at home.
Great.
And there's always a history of at home, I had most of the behaviors. Dad would sometimes get behaviors. He's typically dad every other weekend, but it was more me.
Isn't that always the way it goes?
Always the way, yeah. In school, rarely ever saw them. They honestly rarely ever saw them. Like he knew to keep his cool there. They were like, at most he would shut down. If he got really upset and it was more like a social situation, then he would just shut down. But behaviorally he was doing well at home. But so I thought, okay, let's try to address this ADHD. Like it's really academics that he's struggling with, and we can see that.
Yep.
And primarily last year it was math. And if you think about it, that's like the one class that you have to pay attention step by step. Like English, social studies, you can like kind of zone out and then come back and still get the gist of it. But math, algebra, if you miss that step, then you're not going to be able to get get it correct. So I spoke to his psychiatrist, and we tried a couple different ADHD meds, and those were just horrible, absolutely horrible. Again, anxiety like went out of the roof. Around the same time, he was more and more on TikTok and getting more and more into I guess you could call it conspiracy theories, you know, but there was things going on. There was the balloons, right, from
Yep.
China.
Yep.
There was, you know, at the beginning of the year, our school district had a couple threats of like shooting up a school, including his school directly.
Wow.
And those were leading into it, you know, so where I am changing the meds on him, trying to figure out what can we do. And then he wasn't sleeping at night. So
No, you know that, Jen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we, you know, we have a regular bedtime, and yet even if I had him in bed by 9, he would sometimes not be asleep till like midnight, 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then getting up for school. So during that time, we hit a point where it progressively became worse, like over probably about 4 to 6 weeks. He wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. You know, where in November it was like I would have to call him and be like, get up, get up. I meaning call him because I work out in the morning, you know, so I call him when I leave the gym. It got to the point that I was having to pull him out of bed and dress him. And
He's how old at this point when you're doing this?
right
13?
before he turned 13. Yeah.
Well, okay.
Yeah. So this was the beginning of this year. So yeah. So, and you know, he's grown a lot. So at the time he was right around my height. Now he's taller than me. But you know, pulling him out of bed to get him ready, him missing a lot of school, I guess to kind of go back to at the time he didn't, you know, about a year ago, he didn't have therapy. So I was trying to get him therapy restarted and really seeking a male therapist. And his healthcare provider they were projecting out months. And I was like, no, he needs something now. Like I could see it starting to build up. Right. And I was like, he's really needing something. And so he started therapy probably around like January of this year. But even that was like every few weeks that he was getting it. And so it was building up. He wouldn't sleep at night. He wouldn't get up in the morning. He wasn't really eating that well either. He stopped eating lunches altogether at school. So he wouldn't eat until like 2-3 o'clock when he came home for no apparent reason. Like he wasn't telling me why he wasn't. But he just, yeah. And so at that point, he was seeing his therapist when things were starting to become really bad. We were seeing his therapist at his medical provider at least, I think it was once a week. And then I was really encouraging him to talk to his school counselor. I wanted them to be aware, given the fact that before there was a history of like school not being aware of things, that I was really encouraging him to. And so he would sometimes go miss the morning to go see his therapist and then need to talk to the counselor at school right after that.
And a lot of kids, I've heard this story coming off the pandemic, you know, kids on the spectrum, kids with high anxiety, ADHD. I've heard so much of this.
Yeah.
So let's get to like, where was the worst part?
So the worst part was,
are we there yet, or it got worse?
We're right there. So on his birthday, I took him to BJ's to go eat, and he refused to eat. In fact, he ended up crying in the booth. We came home and it was a 6-hour tantrum. And by tantrum, like him trying to hit me, trying to damage things in the house. His dad lives about 45 minutes away, came and tried to help support during that. Later that week, he again, we went out for a birthday celebration with family, and the same thing. He was actually trying to break glass in the house and trying to damage. And it was over me telling him to basically do one math homework and I will help you with it. And then you can play video games. And that was the trigger to it. That was the trigger then that I took him to the ER to look at psychiatric care. at that time, his dad wasn't fully in agreement. So he had said, let me try taking him. And so I was at my wit's end, right?
Mhm.
Everything he was using, all the strategies I was trying to use, trying to not get frustrated, but as a parent, as a human, that's really hard not to, right? Because
Yeah.
again, we're
Of
working
course.
long days, you
Yep.
know, sometimes working with, working with a hard population too, where it's a very stressful, and then coming home to that too.
Yeah.
It,
That was, I don't know how you pull that off, by the way. You both do it all the time. Jen does the
Mhm.
same thing. Mhm.
yeah, you
Mhm.
just, you almost feel empty at that point. Like
Mhm.
just, you, and then you feel guilty about it,
Of
right?
course. Yeah.
Like, yeah. Um, he was at his dad's house for a few days, and that was almost even worse than it is here. And so his dad did agree. And so,
Validation. Sorry.
yeah, yeah, yeah. His
Not
dad
just you.
finally, yeah, yeah, not, and I think to be honest, his dad needed to see that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
We have been divorced for a while, and I don't think his dad really ever got to see that. And his dad finally like was telling the doctors, Jennifer has said this before, but never had I actually experienced it, So in a
Good.
way, I guess it was better because it helped me and his dad be more like on the same team, I guess, if
Yeah.
that makes sense. Um, and so that second time in a week that we were at the ER, we admitted him.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And that was one of the hardest things. I cried. But my son also realized it. When they asked him, he said, I need help. I need help. So
Wow.
he realized that he needed the help. In there, he was only there for a couple days. We did pull him out, but they went back to the Zoloft that he had been on, and also gave him clonidine to help sleep at night.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so that has honestly helped so much because now he's getting the proper sleep that he needs to.
Wonderful. And so
Um,
as we're sort of closing our time together, what kind of place is he in now?
he's in a much better place. So we pulled him out and he did an inpatient therapy.
Mhm.
That was like 8 hours of group therapy.
Mhm.
And then he went to partial and he went back to school a lot sooner than they thought. And
Wonderful.
he's doing much better this year. I would say over the summer he matured, he's doing much better. He is still struggles with being organized, but
Mhm.
I think is realizing that it's okay to also ask for help at school. That's been a
Yes.
challenge too, was him communicating to his
Mhm.
teachers. And I think he's becoming more comfortable with that and knowing that he's supported and that like no one's gonna be judgy, I guess, on him. But
Mhm.
yeah,
That's great.
yeah.
That's awesome.
Was
So
So, I'm going to ask you as we close out 2 questions. One, and Jen, if you have a question, jump in. Sorry. If you could give advice first to BCBAs who might be asked to support a child with ADHD, and Jen Lucero, I'm going to ask you to comment on that too. And then also advice to parents. Like if you could like give a little golden nugget first to the BCBAs, what would it be?
I think depending on the individual, trying to work with that child or adult with ADHD to seeing what works with them, not necessarily like kind of pushing something onto them, but seeing what's going to be best for them. And then for the caregivers they're working with, um, being flexible and understanding of that and making sure that the caregivers also have some outlet or support for it. Yeah. And then again, the providing that guidance, but also realizing that it's not always going to work out perfectly.
Mhm.
Mm.
Yeah.
If you were to think back on this, like what lessons do you feel like you learned for yourself as a caregiver and a BCBA?
What lessons? I think well, for one, I've learned that I can't put too much on my own plate, right?
Yeah.
Like I need to keep everything in balance. And I think also, as I mentioned, is learning, like, even if in my mind I'm like, oh, just do A, B, and C, that's not how it works for him. And so compromising to give him like that support and structure, but also letting him figure it out on his own way of what's going to work. And I guess not nagging, right? I nag. It's horrible. Like, and I realize it, but I've also realized that that increases his anxiety. So it's giving it more time, I guess, you know, instead of like every 5 minutes, if it's not been done, maybe it's checking in every 20 minutes and
Good one.
giving him that space to get it done. And then at that point, then like, you know, okay, if we don't get it done now, then there's going to be a consequence, which is, you could say like, well, maybe you should do it, you know, immediately. But I also feel like that super strictness doesn't always work for us. It kind of loses its power if I'm always like, if you don't clean up your room, you're going to lose your phone, right? I need to first give them the opportunity to be independent and realize that.
Like a little opportunity to like fail too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Awesome. Jen, did I miss anything?
No, I think she nailed it.
Well-
I'm telling you, it's like looking in a mirror.
I always would, when Dylan's harder on Jen than anyone, and I always say like, oh, same with Melanie, my stepdaughter. She's brutal to her dad and I, and like the nicest person to everyone else. So I always say you hurt the ones you love.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because then other people that are working with our kids, you know, they're like, really? They do that? And
Yep.
almost makes
Yeah.
it feel like you're making it
I'm
up.
always told that Dylan is like the easiest kid to work with, and I'm like, he is? Okay, good. I'm glad for you. So.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm glad you're getting the best version of my kid.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the end of the day, that's what we want, right?
Yeah.
I mean, for them to be comfortable and to get through the day so we can get through our day too.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that story. Wow. There's so many families went through this. So I hope it's very validating for families, and then BCBA is trying to help the families that are going through this. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Well,
Thank you,
for having
Jennifer.
me. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.